שולחן צפון ברך, הלל נרצה, קדש ורחץ, כרמס יחץ, מגיד רחצה, מוציא מצה. שולחן עורך, צפון ברך, הלל נרצה. מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים חמץ ומצה, הלילה הזה כולו מצה. מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים בין יושבים ובין מסובים, הלילה הזה כולנו מסובים. מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? והיא שעמדה לאותינו ולנו, והיא שעמדה לאותינו ולנו, שלא אחד בלבד עמד עלינו לכלותנו, שלא אחד בלבד עמד עלינו לכלותנו, אלא שבכל דור ודור עומדים עלינו לכלותנו, אלא שבכל דור ודור עומדים עלינו לכלותנו, והקדוש ברוך הוא מצילנו מידם, והקדוש ברוך הוא מצילנו מידם. אילו הוציאנו ממצרים ולא עשרה את שבטים. Great job. אילו הוציאנו ממצרים ולא עשרה את שבטים, דיינו.
Okay, and with Dayenu, I think we're going to begin the program. Good evening, everybody. It is an honor to have all of you here. The concept of this evening was actually that we wanted for you to have sort of a sense of being together at the Seder with all of the clergy at KJ. And although we had initially wanted to do this at our Pesach table, so to speak, with it all set out, and I see Rabbi Luxstein has his kittel on, I'm beginning actually with a little bit of the experience of Gullus, of being sent from my house to the office to allow for the preparations of Pesach to continue in my home. But before we begin the program, I just want to mention the sponsorship, which is coming. We are being sponsored this evening by Doina and Dr. Larry Briskin, who are commemorating the yahrzeit of Doina's mother, Hermina Levy, And she was a Holocaust survivor. Though she lost 2 children in Auschwitz, she never lost her faith in God and rebuilt a warm and loving home. And we thank them for this sponsorship. And we hope that all of the words of Torah will truly be a zchut for her neshama, and that what the legacy that she left should inspire all of us this evening. And so we are now going to begin, and we're going to begin with Rabbi Lookstein is with Chazan Burson, who is going to begin with a song.
Good evening, everyone. It's so great to join, to get somewhat of a taste of our Leil Seder. We always start the Leil Seder with the Simanim, and we list the Simanim, all the parts of the Seder that are ahead of us. And that's something that is a little unique and not something we typically do in any ceremony, or especially a meal. When we sit down, we don't usually go through the menu before we start eating. And obviously we do a lot of unique things on Leil Seder. To get our kids, to get our attention, to get their attention, and for them to notice that things are different, so they pay attention and they ask questions. That way we can start a conversation. But also it's because all these steps are so important and special. We want to make sure we don't forget anything, and we don't want to miss out. So we make sure we go through the list before we start to get all the parts of the Seder. So I thought it would be appropriate to start off with singing the Simanim together, as we do on Leil Seder. Kadesh uchatz, karpas yachatz, magid rachza, motzi matza, maror korech, shulchan orech, tzafun barech, alel nirtzah. All right, and now we'll get started. I'll hand it over to Rabbi Lookstein to kick us off.
Thank you, Burson, for that beautiful introduction to the Seder of the Seder. The Rambam, in his formulation of the Haggadah in Perek Chet of Hilchot Chametz U'Matzah, says, after spending Perek Zayin discussing the laws of the Seder, he actually gives the Seder of the Seder. So that song, Kadesh Urachatz Karpas Yachatz, is not just simply a bunch of words. The order of the Seder is absolutely required by our sages. I was asked what my most powerful Seder memory is. And I'll tell you, not a powerful memory, but a very meaningful one. My father, Alav Hashalom, Rabbi Joseph H. Lookstein, sitting at the head of our table with a kittel over his tuxedo, exactly the way I'm sitting now in my daughter's home in Atlanta, getting ready for the Seder. Underneath, I have what amounts to a tuxedo with my white shirt, and you can see my bow tie and my kittel. That's the way my father stood or sat at the Seder. And of course, that was the way he dressed for every Yom Tov. He dressed the first night of Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot in a tuxedo. Why? Because he felt there is such a thing as Big Day Yom Tov. Just like there's Big Day Shabbat. Except, as Rav Soloveitchik said, Big Day Yom Tov are more important and impressive than Big Day Shabbat. we wear our very, very good clothing on Shabbat because on Shabbat, God comes to visit us in our homes. But we wear our best clothing, verputzt, in our tuxedos or beautiful, beautiful dresses on Yom Tov, because on Yom Tov, it's not God who comes to see us, but it's we who go to Jerusalem to see God.
In asked to share a favorite Dvar Torah of the Seder, actually comes from Rachel's father, my father-in-law, and he speaks about the significance of karpas, having moved to the beautiful song from Chazan Berson and that beautiful stirring introduction from Rabbi Luckstein. Many are familiar with the stages of the Seder, but many are actually at a loss to understand and to explain a deeper insight with what are the actual elements. And if we look at many Haggadot and we try and translate what the karpas is, they translated K-A-R-P-A-S, offering us a very literal translation, but give us a very limited understanding of what karpas is. And the word karpas is used in biblical literature, and it appears actually only once in Megillat Esther. We say chor karpas utechelet, and the word karpas refers to some form of cloth, some form of material, which served as a decoration for Achashverosh's party. And we're left with an important question. If this is exactly what karpas is, then what's it doing at the very first step in our Seder? And in fact, the word karpas does appear in one very other important place. In Sefer Bereshit, when Yaakov makes the Ketonet Pasim, the infamous coat of many colors, for Yosef, Rashi defines the word as pasim, kamo karpas, that the coat of many colors is actually just like karpas. And this actually gives us a beautiful insight into why the karpas begins our experience of Magid and why it kicks off the Seder experience. We recite Kiddush not just on Pesach, but on every Shabbat and Yom Tov. And the Urchatz is for karpas, which actually means that karpas is the first crucial focal point of the steps of the Seder. Before we can begin Magid, before we can begin retelling how we got out of Egypt, we need to understand, we need to learn how we got into Egypt. We need to understand exactly what happened between brothers, being sold into slavery, being brought down to Egypt, and this hatred that existed then has become symbolized and embodied in the coat of many colors. And the karpas is exactly informing us of that. And the coat represents the divisiveness among Jews, the intolerance that exists for so many, that is still directed all around the place and for us. And only after we contemplate what the karpas element is, then we can begin Magid and understand the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. We have to cure for ourselves this karpas syndrome and understand what it means to have unity for all Jews. And may God grant all of us and our families health, so next year we can be together in person for this experience in Sedarim with all our family members, and we can enjoy the Korban Pesach together in Yerushalayim.
Amen. This is the night of questions and answers. We encourage our families, our children to ask questions, which is something, is challenging. To make them ask questions and also to have the answers. But this is something we are not afraid of, and we sing about it. And I was thinking, as we mentioned before, that we do all these things that are different, so the children ask. And in a way, this time that we are in, that's very, very different than what we're used to, in some way is God's way of telling us, ask questions, and don't take things for granted and the way they always are. Everything is different. Things that we're so used to having, we don't have. We should ask, we should think why we have them, why we don't have them. מה נשתנה הלילה הזה מכל הלילות, מכל הלילות? שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים חמץ ומצה, חמץ ומצה. הלילה הזה כולו מצה. הלילה הזה כולו מצה. שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים שיער ירקות, שיער ירקות. הלילה הזה מרור מרור. הלילה הזה כולו מרור. מן נשתנה הלילה הזה, מן נשתנה הלילה הזה, מן נשתנה הלילה הזה, מן נשתנה הלילה הזה. שבכל הלילות איננו מטבילים אפילו פעם אחת. הלילה הזה שתי פעמים. מה נשתנה הלילה הזה, מה נשתנה הלילה הזה, מה נשתנה הלילה הזה, מה נשתנה הלילה הזה. And we'll leave the fourth question for the Seder.
Rabbi Lookstein, I believe you also had a Dvar Torah you wanted to share with us on Kiddush.
One of the favorite Divrei Torah that I have from my revered teacher, Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. You can find this in the reader that is coming to your home any day now, where I spelled it all out. But now I would like to tell it to you and actually sing it to you with the permission of Chazon Bersan. We know that we have a story to tell on Pesach night. And the Mishnah says the story begins with the bad and ends with the good. Matchil bigenut u'mesayem b'shevach. But the Mishnah doesn't tell us what the bad is and what the good is. The Gemara has a dispute between Rav and Shmuel. Rav says the bad is the fact that we were founded as a people in idolatry, in Terach's home, factory, and store, where Abraham grew up. That's the bad. The good is Mount Sinai, where we ended up after the Exodus from Egypt. Shmuel, Rav's colleague, I have the Exodus. Shmuel says the bad and the good is from slavery to freedom. Now we know that the very first paragraph after the four questions reflects Shmuel's answer. Avadim hayinu leFaro b'Mitzrayim. We were servants and slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Vayotzienu, and God took us out. Bad to good. Where is Rav's story in the Haggadah? The answer seems to be a few pages later, right after the four sons, when we read the paragraph, Mitchila ovdei avodah zara hayu avotenu. In the beginning, our forefathers worshipped idols. Terach, the father of Abraham, and so on and so forth. And then God brought us to his service. Rav Soloveitchik asked the question, in the Gemara, Rav's answer, the spiritual redemption from idolatry to the worship of one God, precedes Shmuel, who's talking about a physical redemption from slavery to freedom. Why does the Haggadah switch the order from the Gemara? And he answers, the Haggadah did not switch the order. If you look back at Kiddush, you will see that the Kiddush on Pesach night starts, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol am, v'romamanu mikol lashon, v'kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav. God chose us from all people, raised us above all nations, and sanctified us with his mitzvot. When the Rambam, Maimonides, discusses the story from bad to good, he first discusses Rav's story and listen to the words. One has to start with the bad and end with the good. How so? Matchil u'mesaper. You start and you tell a story that in the beginning, our forefathers in the days of Terach and before were following all of the nothingness of the idolatrous culture. And they were pursuing avodat elilim, the service of idols. And then the Rambam gives the good. U'mesayem b'dat ha'emet. And the story ends with the true religion. And listen to the words, the meter of the words. Shekervanu hamakom lo. God brought us close to him. V'hivdilanu meha'umot, separated us from the nations. V'kervanu leyichudo, and brought us close to his oneness. Listen to the meter of the Rambam, which Rav Soloveitchik heard, and look what he did with it. Shekervanu hamakom lo v'hivdilanu meha'umot v'kervanu leyichudo. Kiddush, Pesach night. Asher bachar banu mikol am v'romamanu mikol lashon v'kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav. Same meter as the Rambam's meter when telling the story of how we went from bad to good. And what I discovered was that you can actually sing the Rambam just as we sing the Kiddush. Kiddush is Asher bachar banu mikol am v'romamanu mikol lashon v'kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav. The Rambam's words, Shekervanu hamakom lo v'hivdilanu meha'umot v'keravanu leyichudo. Rav Soloveitchik heard the echoes of Kiddush in the Rambam's words, and that's the way he answered the question, why doesn't Rav come first in the Haggadah? Why does Shmuel come first with Avadim Hayinu? And the answer, of course, is no, Rav does come first in Kiddush, which on Pesach night is not just the sanctification of the day, but is the beginning of telling the story.
Yasher Koach, Rabbi Lookstein. Among the things we're doing tonight is, aside from having all of our rabbis talk about their favorite Divrei Torah, we're also asking the rabbis to repeat a memory that made a great impression on them from the Seder. And the one I would like to share with you is not one that I'm terribly proud of, but one that I learned, I think, a great deal from. I must have been in my early teens, maybe 14 or 15. And I came back and had my own view about some part of the Haggadah. And I got into a very interesting argument with my siblings. And then the argument got heated and it even got angry. And I remember looking at my mom after sort of the argument sort of slowed to a stop and seeing how upset and how sad she was. And she looked up and just said one phrase. She said, the worst thing for a parent is to see her children fight. And I could never forget that image. And, you know, when we get to the Haggadah, and parts of the Haggadah sort of remind me of this. In particular, one part reminds me of this, which is the part about the four sons. Now, the four sons, there's a lot to be said about them in terms of Divrei Torah, but I don't know what happens at your table. When my kids were younger, and at a lot of Seders I would go to, there would be this sort of joke of which child gets to be the Chacham, which child gets to be the Rasha. And it was almost like, who's which? Which one's the Tom? Which is the She'eno Yodea Lishol? Who's the wise son? Who's the wicked son? Who's the simple son? Who's the son that doesn't know how to ask questions? And for a moment, you almost feel like, okay, every kid is sort of finding their spot, but they're also maybe sort of pulling apart and going in different directions. And you sit for a moment and say to yourself, even if these four sons are different, you want them to be together. And I think that's one of the most powerful lessons of the Seder. There's a midrash that says that God saw how the children of Rachel and Leah were treating the children of the shvachot, the children of the maidservants. How God saw how the different children of Jacob were treating each other, and sometimes they were treating each other without respect. And God said, I will send you all into exile. And then no one will say, I'm better than the other. And you'll all come together as one family and as one community. And I think for me, that's what this memory taught me. And that's what I think the lesson of the Seder is that we need to always, no matter how different we are, no matter how different the four sons are, we need to figure out how to be one family and one community.
Very powerful, Rabbi. Thank you. I was asked a question about what my most powerful Pesach experience was. It takes me back to when I was in university. I was in YU at the time, and I was participating in a program called YU SSR, where we were sent to run community seders and seminars in Belarus and Leipzig, Germany. So I had gone with a group to Leipzig, Germany. And so when we got to the city, the rabbi brought us to the Torah Center, where we were going to run our seders and seminars. So we passed by these iron gates. There was a small garden, and then the rabbi stopped, and he pointed at a concrete valley with a stream flowing through it. He said, on November 3rd, 1938, the night of Kristallnacht, the Jews of the town were gathered exactly at this point where you're standing right now to be taken to the camps. The place where we were going to introduce Judaism to Jews, Russian and Ukrainian teenagers who had little exposure to Judaism was overseeing the exact spot where the Leipzig Jewish community was destroyed 69 years prior. That's a response. That's a major response to all that Hitler tried to do to us. Because right in front of where he decided that he was going to try to destroy Judaism, we were there rebuilding it and reconnecting these new families, Be'ezrat Hashem, with Judaism. So there's one participant that particularly comes to mind. I clearly remember her pink dyed hair. She must have been around 16 years old or so, and she didn't really say much. She was kind of reserved. But whenever there was something in the Seder or in one of the seminars she liked, she would say, cool. At the second night of our Seder, which went quite late because it was very involved and interactive, right while we were singing Haggadah, about 2 o'clock in the morning, she pulled me to the side and she sat me down. I had no idea what she was going to ask me. She hadn't spoken to me for the entire 2 days, besides saying cool. She sat me down and she looked at me and she said, Rabbi, could you help me come up with a Hebrew name? I want a Hebrew name. I think just as the Jews sought to remain connected to their past by maintaining their Hebrew names, she sought to reconnect by asking for a Hebrew name, to engage with her past and to become part of the present and the future. A redemption. We need to realize how powerful this night, the Seder, could be, as it was for her on just these 2 nights of the Seder, desiring now to really reconnect. But even more powerful, I think, is our response to Pharaoh and to Hitler and all those who are aligned with them. And when we say Shefoch Hamatecha, and we ask God to pour out his anger on all those who seek to destroy us, I think the much more powerful than that are reactions from girls and boys, our young children, just like this one, who still ask, what's my Hebrew name?
That was absolutely beautiful, Rabbi Laniato. That's a powerful memory and a powerful lesson of how this evening is really an evening of Jewish identity. One of the things we asked everyone to come forward with, and you saw with Rabbi Luxstein, is to speak about a favorite Dvar Torah. And I was thinking for a while, because there's so many that you think about, and actually my favorite Dvar Torah is not one that I learned from a great rabbi. I learned that he's a great person, but not a great rabbi. And I'll give you a little bit of context for this. In 2004, there was a firebombing of a Jewish school in Montreal, literally the night before Pesach. Erev Pesach in the morning is when the community found out about it, and everybody was rushing to see what they could do. And actually, the Prime Minister of Canada came to visit the school that day. And the Minister of Justice of Canada at that time, who was actually a member of my shul, Erwin Kotler, who was a well-known human rights lawyer, and he also represented Natan Sharansky when he was in jail in the Soviet Union. So Erwin Kotler was interviewed, and he said, well, tonight is the night of the Seder. And he said, you know, we read in the Haggadah, Shebechol dor vador omdim aleinu lachaloseinu. In every generation, we feel that there are people who come to destroy the Jewish people. We don't understand. What is it about anti-Semitism? And Erwin Kotler said, this is another example of that story. But then he stopped and he said, but I want you to understand that's not what the Haggadah is emphasizing. We always remember this phrase. In every generation, they come to destroy us. But actually, the paragraph of V'hi Sha'amda is about Jewish destiny, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu mi'adam, that God saves us from those hands. And the way Erwin Kotler phrased it when he was being interviewed on TV is that this paragraph doesn't only tell us about the longest hatred, about how tenacious anti-Semitism is. It teaches us about an incredibly strong people that has overcome every challenge in their way. If we want to talk about a history of anti-Semitism, that is incomplete without talking about a people that has had the courage and the tenacity and the strength to overcome every challenge that has been put in their way.
שעמדה לאבותינו ולנו, שלא אחד בלבד עמד עלינו לכלותנו, עמד עלינו לכלותנו, והיא שעמדה לאבותינו, והיא שעמדה לאבותינו ולנו, שלא אחד בלבד עמד עלינו לכלותנו, עמד עלינו לכלותנו, והקדוש ברוך הוא מצילנו, מצילנו מידה. והקדוש ברוך הוא מצילנו, מצילנו מידה. והקדוש ברוך הוא מצילנו, מצילנו מידה. והקדוש ברוך הוא יצילנו, יצילנו מידה. יצילנו מידם.
So one of the other elements of this evening is to talk about what is the most important message that we would want to convey at the Seder to our children. And what I believe is actually the overarching message of the entire Haggadah is encapsulated in a phrase that we say in the final blessing just before we eat. We have our second glass, the blessing we make before the second glass of wine. And it's a blessing that begins with the words Asher Ga'alanu, which talks about reflecting on the fact that God redeemed our ancestors and redeemed us from Egypt on this evening. But then the blessing continues. And this continuation is actually proposed by Rabbi Akiva. It's a matter of debate in the Mishnah, but Rabbi Akiva wins the argument. And the blessing continues where it says that may God and the God of our ancestors bring us to future holidays and future festivals that should come to us in peace, rejoicing in the rebuilding of your city and being overjoyed with your divine service. The blessing continues according to Rabbi Akiva, not just with saying, God, you redeemed us from Egypt, but saying, God, you will redeem us again in the future. And what Rabbi Akiva is teaching us is the message of hope. And by the way, that is the most important message of the Haggadah. It is hope. The entire Haggadah, and I've given many classes on this, and I gave a Shabbat Haggadah drasha about this 2 years ago. The entire Haggadah was actually a response to the Churban. It was a response to the destruction of the temple. And rabbis, and a generation later, a rabbi like Rabbi Akiva come and say, we must never lose hope in a future redemption. The Haggadah comes to say we were once redeemed, we will be redeemed again in the future. And if I have to tell my kids what is the one message you should take away from this evening, it is hope. One should never, ever lose hope. That is the ultimate lesson of the Haggadah.
I want to speak to the message of what the mitzvah, the instruction, the commandment of the Haggadah actually is. It's based on a biblical pasuk, a biblical statement. V'higadeta lebencha bayom hahu lemor ba'avur zeh asa Adonai li beseti miMitzrayim. The first half of that, v'higadeta, like Haggadah, you should relate lebencha to your children bayom hahu on this day. So there's no mitzvah to read the Haggadah. In fact, it's the very term that I just mentioned to you, Haggadah, speaks to the mitzvah being disconnected from a text, non-textual. And I think we miss the opportunity of the Seder night and this mitzvah when we focus exclusively on the reading. We feel accomplished when we finish, but we need to think about whether we achieve something solely through the reading. So I'm not saying that we should not read the text. We should read the text. But I'm saying that's not the mitzvah. I'm saying that we need to realize that this reading is not the fulfilling of the mitzvah of v'higadeta lebencha bayom hahu. And you should relate to your child on this day. Because this mitzvah is to relate your own personal experiences, to discover it firstly for yourself and then to express to your family what it means to you to be a Jew, to be part of this history, this present, and this future, and a member of Am Yisrael, your experience of it, to relate it in your own words, to have a real frank and open conversation about these experiences and what they mean to you. And why is it that this night is being made different than all other nights? It's precisely to give us this opportunity, one night a year or 2 nights outside of Israel, to rediscover for ourselves and to relate to the next generation what it means and why it's important to be a Jew. So we shouldn't just be reciting off a text. We need to be communicating in our own words and through our own experiences. And that's what the word Haggadah means, to relate your own experiences. So note, by the way, the mitzvah is not likro, to read, it's not lemor, to state, it's lehagid. So this is really key. This is the key. More than the rituals, it's our personal expression and our role modeling. It's really experiential education at its best. It's us showing our children why it's so important to us. And so we have text, we have props, we have these rituals, but they're only a conduit for us expressing it ourselves. Ba'avur zeh, the end of the pasuk states, Asa Adonai li beseti miMitzrayim. As God did it for us, what God does for us now here throughout our lives in the United States of America, not in some far away past solely, in a long, far away land, but my personal story, what happened to me, how God has been with me, saved me now in my lifetime. To express to our children very clearly why we're committed. And so Behigadita, please, the mitzvah is not to read through the Haggadah and feel accomplished finishing early. Not to come to shul the next day if you're coming and say the time you finished and it being so early that you read the Haggadah. But to come in and say, you know what? I rediscovered for myself why Judaism is so important to me. And I was able to model that and express that to my children and to tell them my personal story, how God was with me and took me out of troubles, what my role is as part of the larger nation, and why Judaism matters to me.
In extending on this theme about the centrality of children and children in the story to tell and to keep telling, which lives at really the center of gravity of the entire experience of the Seder, and extending on that idea and on that theme, towards the end of Magid, we're told, Rabban Gamliel Haya Omer, Rabban Gamliel used to say, Kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu, whoever does not say these three things, Pesach, lo yatsa yedei chovato, does not fulfill their obligation. And what are those three things? Pesach, matzah, and maror. Just a few days ago in Daf Yomi, we learned on page Kuf Tet Vav and 115, it says as follows, Amar Rava teaches, Bala matzah yatsa, if a person swallows matzah, they fulfill the obligation. Bala maror lo yatsa, but if you swallow maror, you do not fulfill your obligation. What's the mandate? You need to consume both. The matzah, we're not required to taste, we're required to eat. So if you swallow it without quite tasting it and enjoying it, people have differing opinions whether it's enjoyable or not. But if you eat it, consume it, and swallow it, and you haven't tasted it, that's fine. You fulfilled your obligation. But when it comes to maror, you do not fulfill your obligation by consuming it. You need to digest it, experience it, cry, and have it completely experientially overtake our bodies and our minds, our thoughts, our smells, and inundate our senses. One of the themes in extracting the value of the messages that we want to impart onto our children, I think is captured by this particular sugya in the Gemara, and as it connects to the fact that we are not yotzei yedei chovatenu, we do not fulfill our obligation unless we have done this. One of the lessons I think that becomes so critical to impart onto our children is that in our religious identity, and our identity as Jews, there are certain life experiences that we need to understand, consume, ask, question, experience, and be completely inundated and surround our senses about the experience of that moment. And there's certain moments when it comes to Jewish identity that it's about commitment. It's not about what you taste, it's not about what you feel, it's not about what you smell, but it's about the simple joy of acting and the simple joy of engaging in that activity. And when it comes towards the end of Magid, and we need to do these things, we need to impart and partake in these experiential items. Some things we taste, some things we ingest, some things we digest, and some things we feel, and some things we do because that's part of the narrative of commitment. And we think about the binding agents of what has kept us together for so many generations, despite what was happening around the world, starting all the way from the time of Egypt until what we experience now. There are those moments that we taste, that we savor, that we hold on to, and we do not fulfill our obligation unless we've experienced it. And there are those moments that it's not about what we feel, but it's about doing, and it's about acting, and it's about showing our commitment. And as we end the Magid section, literally with this on our mouth and in our mouth, that it really imparts, I think, a powerful message, not just for the adults in the room, but for the children around the table as well. And to understand the duality of our experience about what it means to be a Jew.
Beautiful. I saw in the promotion of this event that sign on to hear what Rabbi Laniado does in his home. So I had something else for this slot, but then I saw the promotion. I said, okay, I'm going to add something here fun. So we have a custom, and by the way, I think Pesach is very interesting because a lot of the customs are particularly within singular homes, right, or larger families. So it's always interesting to find out, as I did, that this custom is spread throughout the entire Syrian community and actually found throughout the Middle East with various variations. So this is very much experiential. How do we experience leaving Egypt? So this is found in our Haggadah, and we recite the following. We recite half of a pasuk. The full pasuk starts off, and I have it here, so I make sure I recite it properly. So Bnei Israel took their dough before it became chametz, before it became leaven, right? And they carried it. Their leftovers. They had wrapped it up in a wrap, ready to go, right over their left shoulder, and they headed on their way. They went on their way. And so, what do we do in my family, and for many of the Syrian and Sephardic families? There are obviously variations. In my family, the way we do it is we go around the table and we try to encourage everybody to participate. We have half of the afikoman, because we break the afikoman. It's not exactly half. It's a different custom. We put part of it within a cloth. There are various cloths. In my family, put it easiest in a pillowcase. It holds it very well. It has a nice slot. Put that over our left shoulder and recite the second half, right? Because this is as the dough. I'm acting out like I have the dough. And I state Misharotam, my leftovers of my food, they're wrapped up as I have it now in my cloth. And we did like Moshe had instructed us. And now here's the really fun part, the Arabic. So I'm going to say it as I heard it. I don't actually know Arabic, so please forgive me if I mispronounce, especially the last one. I always heard it and said it differently than in the book. So I'm going to say it as I know it, but could be wrong. So we say, right? So where are you coming from? And sometimes they said in English. Misraim is the response, and you're saying that as you're holding it over your shoulder. So then everybody on the table then asks the individual, where are you going? And you respond, Yerushalayim, we're going to Yerushalayim. And then the way I always heard, which is different than what's in the book, Ishu Zuwatak, which is always we just love to say, Ishu Zuwatak, it just sounds really fun. So I think that means, what are you bringing with you? Masa umaror. You bring masa and maror with you over your shoulder. I always found that interesting, right? It's specific, not just matzah, it's also the maror in there. Maybe that ties into what Rachel was saying before. So that's really interesting. So this is a custom that we have. There are lots of variations of it. In some houses, only the leader that does it. In other houses, they actually get up and pretend to walk. In other Sephardic communities, somebody will actually leave the house and go to the door to do this, and all sorts of fun variations on this. So I think it's really interesting, one experiential custom that's become an official part of the Seder, not just from one family, but more expansive. I think it's really interesting that it has two major elements of the Seder. It has the slavery, where you're coming from. It has the freedom, where you're going, Egypt to Jerusalem, past and future. And like I said, it also is super interesting how it's really spread, and it really shows the connectivity of our families, individual family units, and larger communities. And it's really spread throughout multiple different Sephardic communities. I wonder if it's even in Ashkenaz communities. And I think this also shows that we have the door open, even though we are disparate and spread throughout the world, we're still so connected and thereby are open to redemption. I
think by now we're already at Shulchan Orech. It's time to have dinner. That's what it feels like. אתה בחרתנו, אי מכל העמים, אהבת אותנו ורצית בנו ורוממתנו מכל הלשונות. אהבת אותנו ורצית בנו ורוממתנו מכל הלשונות, וקידשתנו במצוותיך, במצוותיך, וקרבתנו מלכנו לעבודתך, וקידשתנו במצוותיך, במצוותיך, וקרבתנו מלכנו לעבודתך, ושמך הגדול הגדול והקדוש עלינו קראת, ושמך הגדול הגדול והקדוש עלינו קראת, קדשנו במצוותיך במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך, סבינו בטובך, ושר נפשנו בישועתך. קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך, סבינו בטובך, ושר נפשנו בישועתך. אוהב את ליבנו לעובדך באמת, ותהל 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 ליבנו לעובדך
Somebody once asked me, not once actually, but recently, what will you ask for if you get the afikoman? Normally, I put the afikoman in my pillow, down the pillowcase, and at some point during the evening when I'm preoccupied, one of my children or grandchildren filches it from me. But what would happen if I actually kept the afikoman? What would I ask for if I had it myself? I have no question what I would ask for. I would ask for the zechus, the privilege of being able next year to lead a big Seder in Jerusalem. And at the end of that Seder, when we all say L'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim, be able to do what we always do when we have that Seder, get up and dance around the ballroom to L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. That's what I would ask for if I merited to get the afikoman this year.
And I have to echo what Rabbi Lookstein said. For me, the one, I hope I'm unmuted. For me, the one thing that I really have been missing for the last 15 months is the ability to visit Israel. You know, at the end of January last year, we went to Israel, which was fortunate. But Israel is a place where my heart always is. It's not just because my brother lives there or my son lives there or my parents are buried there. One thing that always connects me to Israel, one thing that always makes me say L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, is the memory I have of when I visited Israel as a little child. And I visited with my grandfather, who was 72 years old at that time. And I will never forget the way he looked, because it was the first time he had visited Israel. And I will never forget the look on his face when he stepped off that plane. And that is with me for the rest of my life. And for me, going to Israel is almost being able to breathe. It's what keeps my neshama, keeps my soul going. So if I get the afikoman as well, I'm asking God for the opportunity to go visit Israel.
One of the most formative memories for me in growing up in the Krug household was being together with my grandparents. I am the grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors, and to sit around the Seder table where we're telling our stories and reading about the past and sharing questions and ideas and thoughts and discourse and debate, to sit around and to look at my grandparents who themselves were survivors and be able to hear in their voice and in their tone and in their stories how the story of Egypt continued to prove itself and recalibrate itself throughout history. Right before we invite Eliyahu to the door, my grandfather would stand up and have all of us rise and engage in a reading that we had both in Hebrew and in English. And the reading is as follows. On this night of the Seder, we remember with reverence and love the 6 million of our people of the European exile who perished at the hands of a tyrant more wicked than the Paro, who enslaved our fathers in Egypt. Come, said he to his minions, let us cut them off from being a people, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. And they slew the blameless and pure, men and women and little ones, with vapors of poison, and burned them with fire. But we abstained from dwelling on the deeds of the evil ones. Now, the remnants of our people who were left in the ghettos and camps of annihilation rose up against the wicked ones for the sanctification of the name, and slew many of them before they died. On the first night of Passover, the remnants in the ghetto of Warsaw rose up against the adversary, even as in the days of Judah the Maccabee. They were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death, they were not divided. And they brought redemption to the name of Israel through all the world. וממעמקים פתחו הקדושים את פיהם בשירת אני מאמין בביאת המשיח. And from the depths of their affliction, the martyrs lifted their voices in a song of faith in the coming of the Messiah, when justice and brotherhood will reign among the men. And we would all pause, and I know Rabbi Lookstein remembers my grandfather, the colonel, and his deep baritone voice would sing, Ani Mamin, Ani Mamin, Ani Mamin, Be'emunah Sheleima. And all of us would sing, my grandfather with his strong voice, my grandmother in a broken voice. And we would have this moment right before we would open the door. And I remember looking at each of my grandparents and just thinking how much they longed for Elijah the prophet to come, how much they begged and hoped that they could open the door and that Eliyahu Hanavi would be there to save them. And for us to sit around our table, thank God with the 5 of us, my immediate siblings, and now over 90 great-grandchildren combined between the families. Eliyahu showed his prowess. Eliyahu showed up. And to be able to be together and to sing these words of Ani Ma'amin, and this is a tradition we continue in our home today, where we read in Hebrew and in English and recite those powerful words, Ani Ma'amin be'emunah shlema, that even when times are trying, even when times are challenging, that we muster up the strength and the confidence, and as Rabbi Steinmetz mentioned, with unbelievable hope, the centrality of hope, Ani Ma'amin be'emunah shlema, to believe with unwavering faith.
I have such memories of those Sedarim. In being true to the advertising that Rabbi Liano mentioned, apparently the classes are going to share some fun and engaging activities that we have at our Seder table. And the hour is late and people start to fall asleep a little bit, get a little tired, a little weary. So we've collected a lot of different props and games and ways to keep people engaged, certainly those younger members of the Seder table. And just to share a few, we have a lot of questions that we share. We hide under people's plates, under cups, and around the table, under chairs. And part of the game is for people to see what their questions are. And we publish some of the questions that we've shared in the Haggadah Companion, which everybody should have received in the mail. We do a lot of dress-ups and a lot of role-playing with lots of fun costumes. We have a marshmallow gun that is kosher LePesach. And I will say that my marshmallow arsenal has grown to a crossbow and a marshmallow gun and mini marshmallows, exactly. And if you ask a question or if you answer a question, I have the merit of shooting a marshmallow gun at you. And the kids enjoy running around. There are marshmallows everywhere, but it's a lot of fun for everybody to to experience these marshmallows. We have Seder dollars, not sure of the exchange rate this year, but asking a question, whoever's at the Seder of any age can get a Seder dollar, can trade it in afterwards. And we have a lot of games and a lot of fun. And in closing the Seder, when we look at Nirtzah, we look at L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, just a memory that is so etched in my mind. I was in 6th grade and the family had emigrated to Australia just 4 days before the Seder. Family from Cochin in India, and they came to our school and our community, and we were hosted, opened up our home like many other families to have them for Shabbatot and meals, and they came to our home for second Seder. And the father, Ronnie, shared such with beautiful emotional tones, just what it was like to live, what it was like to leave, and all the different customs they had. And for us and for me and my siblings, it was just a beautiful reminder of the unity and the family that we are, the Jewish people. We'd have guests at our Seder outside of my cousins, my grandparents, and all of a sudden we had this family we only knew for 4 days with wildly different customs than I'd ever seen before. Singing different songs, different tunes, different ideas, but the notion that we're all one big family. As we say L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim this year, let's hope we can all be with the Luxstein family being led by Rabbi Luxstein in the ballroom, but ultimately with all our family members, all of this, a distant memory of this separation, and we can be revisited in our homes and of course in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh.
חסל סידור פסח כהלכתו, לכל משפטו וחוקתו, כאשר זכינו לסדר אותו, כאשר זכינו לסדר אותו, כן נזכה לעשותו, זך שוכן מעונה, קומם קהל הדת ממנה, בקרוב נא אל ניתחנה, בקרוב נא אל ניתחנה, פדויים לציון ברינה. לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, לשנה הבאה בירושלים הבנויה, לשנה הבאה בירושלים הבנויה, לשנה הבאה בירושלים הבנויה, לשנה הבאה בירושלים הבנויה, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, לשנה הבאה בירושלים הבנויה, 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 לשנה הבאה בירושלים הבנויה. קולות בלב אף בנעימה, נפש יהודי הומייה, ופאתי מזרח קדימה, עין לציון צופיה, עוד לא
Well, that's the program. And like any good Seder, we finished a couple of minutes late, but that's fine. That's what a good Seder is all about. I want to just, once again, just thank everyone who was involved, beginning first with the sponsorship from Doina and Dr. Larry Briskin. I want to thank Effie Landau, who many of you see here on the screen. He's the one who's making sure that everybody works smoothly and properly. We want to thank him. And above all, I want to thank the exceptional KJ clergy for opening up their hearts and their souls and inspiring all of us before Pesach. Thank you all for sharing with us, and thank you all for being a part of this program, and have a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. And we can all be unmuted and say Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, everybody.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Sameach, everyone.
Sameach.